I'm also gonna open this up to questions. So I don't mean to dominate the conversation, but I've just found John's career to be fascinating. John, what's your greatest professional satisfaction, if you can talk about that? Because you've got the business piece of it. There's the personal piece of it as well as you run an 80-hour, 100-hour a week business. But what's your greatest personal satisfaction?
Still being alive today. No, I think greatest personal is obviously the success of Aecon, from its very humble beginnings to where it is today. I'm very proud of that. I think that today we are, if not the most respected company in Canada, certainly one of the most respected companies in Canada, right across the country, by our clients, by our partners, by our employees, by the unions we work with, by our suppliers, right across the piece. There's the respect for what we do, and that's extremely satisfying. The other thing is, to the extent that the industry was able to contribute to the government's decisions to go ahead with these large projects and to have convinced the government that we will be able to deliver, has been, I think, a major achievement, because we've had to grow with the demands. Now, we haven't done it by ourselves. We've had some other large international construction companies come into our markets. So that has kept us competitive, kept us sharp. We've had to compete with the foreigners at times. Some are in the room here today, and we respect them. We partner with some of them, and we've learned from them as they have learned from us. And so it's satisfying for me, as one of the founders of the public-private partnership movement, which I started in the early, I'd say in Canada in the early 90s, is really when things got going in Canada, and we were fighting the unions at the beginning. The public service unions were resisting the idea of the private sector getting involved in the management of infrastructure, because that had been the purview of governments only until then. So that was a big fight. And then there was a lot of resistance all the way through about government agencies always having it done themselves, resisting the idea that the private sector could do it maybe as well or maybe even better. So those were things we had to fight. And the P3 movement really took hold 15 to 20 years ago. So that's something else that I'm very proud of, because it's something that I contribute to. I was very vocal. I was a pioneer of that. It had already existed in other places. We weren't inventing something new. We were just introducing something to Canada that had not been there before. So successful company, a new way of doing things, which really has revolutionized the construction industry in Canada. And I always end my life story when I talk about it that for over 50 years I stayed out of trouble.
That's pretty good. So the two things really quickly, maybe I'll do I was going to ask you about technology, because that's a huge theme of this event, and just to get a sense of your perspective of how you see tech. Go ahead, we'll do that right now. How do you see technology? Is it as big an explosion in the infrastructure business and as big an opportunity as people tend to see it? How do you see that? Put that in perspective.
Well, it definitely is not an explosion yet, but it definitely is part of the future. I live in a high-rise building, and across the street last year there was another high-rise building going up. And I looked through the window and looked down at what they were doing. The formwork, the reinforcing steel installation, the concrete pouring with a vibrator inside the concrete, and the curing, and the tower crane moving around, and the men moving around. And it was exactly the same as I saw 50 years ago. Nothing had changed in 50 years. Now, what had changed was the back office and the drawings and BIM and maybe more efficient electrical, mechanical systems and the elevator and so on. But the physical execution hadn't changed. that is nuts. That is so what we are looking at in technology today, and some of them are in infancy and some of them are a little more advanced. Today we're using drones, we're using 3D modeling, we're using some modularization, we're using a BIM, obviously, and we see a lot of things developing, but we don't see yet the explosion that you're talking about. I think we're on the edge of it. I think that there will be things like very large-scale prefabrication. 3D printing, we're already seeing 3D printing now of footbridges, so I think that'll develop. Obviously, the large use of drones. And the other thing we talk about in innovation, and there's a fellow here called Matthew Catapern who's with Aecon, and he heads up our Innovation Council, and we have people who are working on all kinds of new ideas to improve productivity and safety, and I stress safety. We're developing and we're using exoskeletons, ergoskeletons now to help monitor the movement of our bodies when we're lifting heavy weights on construction sites. We're using sensors, not only on our employees, but also on our equipment, just to eliminate the possibility of accidents. So there's all these incremental things happening along the way. And then, of course, all of the systems, the ERPs and so on, that help too.
Can I interrupt you for 2 seconds?
Sure.
The sensors that you guys are utilizing in Toronto for the expansion of the metro station
Yeah.
are conceived here at Cocoa.
Oh, really? Okay. Bravo. Did you get a good price for them?
I'm not involved in the project.
Oh, okay.
Colleagues are, so
I'd love to hear about some more about that and then see what they're actually installing in the field. So technology for us is absolutely necessary, but it is in an industry which is still very fragmented, and you know, so you saw some technology developments in the room next door. I was intrigued by some of them. No explosion yet, but definitely there for the future. There is, and I'm careful when I say this, but there's an innate resistance to the adoption of some of the available technologies today by the people in our industry who are very traditional and very conservative in their ways of doing things. So you're not only trying to incorporate things to improve productivity and safety, which is to everybody's benefit, but you're fighting your own troops very often and trying to bring them into the 21st century. But we'll get there. I might add one more thing, and I know it's on the mind of many people here. That is our succession plan for the workers in our industry. We have the average age has been rising inexorably every year, and if we don't get a lot of smart, young, ambitious people, male and female, indigenous and not, in our industry, we're going to be badly short of labor, and that may force a lot more modularization, prefabrication than anything else. It's just that shortage of labor. So I don't see technology replacing labor like we're worried about some other technologies, driverless cars and trucks and so on. In our case, there's a huge demand for that technology. And I don't know if Alex Wong is in the room, but yeah, Alex there. And we've been talking at the World Economic Forum about how to bring in these people. And the way to do that is to explain to, and I'm thinking of my grandchildren now who are 17 and 19, who would never think of working on a construction site as a career. And I'm explaining to them, I saw them on the weekend, and I told them that participating in an industry like that helps young people to shape the sustainable future that they're all dreaming about and want to be participating in. And the new technologies will allow them to grow technologically as well and have some very interesting career paths. So I think education, that being in the construction industry is not a second-class job anymore, but it's something that's highly respected, well paid, and creating our better future is something we should focus on.
And John, the best engineers are in Montreal. We've got thousands of students now graduating, ready to go with you guys. They're all here.
And we're ready to hire them. We need,
All
how,
our engineers.
Roger, how many people do we need? I think 700 people just on the REM project, so.
There you go. Perfect. So, John, one other thing before I open it up to questions. You have some really interesting international experiences. I mean, you've done a lot of firsts, right? So the Cross Israel Expressway is a phenomenal project. The Guayaquil Airport project. Can you talk a little bit about your experience in countries around the world and why and how you've been so successful in kind of iconic projects, hard projects?
So it wasn't Guayaquil, it was Quito, but it's both in Ecuador. It's okay. It's okay. International, and there's somebody from CCC here today. So what we do when we go international today is we do it in partnership with the Canadian government. Canadian Commercial Corporation is a vehicle that the Canadian government is a Canadian government agency that facilitates export of products and knowledge and expertise from Canada internationally. And so we partnered with them in countries where, like Ecuador, it might be complicated politically. Did we not have a support like the government with us? So together with CCC, we go into a country and we talk about a sole source opportunity. I heard about sole source opportunities in Taiwan and China earlier this morning. We would go to an agency of a government and say, we're ready to make a proposal, whether it be an airport, a road, power project, and we would say, we don't want your money, we just want the right to develop something which will be good for your country. It'll be a revenue-producing piece of infrastructure, and we'll use what we call the Swiss challenge process, which is a unsolicited bid, but then put out to the world to match our bid. If they do, we have the right to also bid, and if we need to match whatever that lower bid might be. And once that's completed, we have the right to proceed on an exclusive basis. We've done that a couple of times now. We're now working on the Bermuda airport, and that is again with CCC. And again, that was sole source. The things that we do outside of Canada are always based on things we have done in Canada successfully. So if we built a toll road like we did Highway 407 in Toronto, we were able to export that technology to Israel. If we built a successful airport, as we did many airports, including the airport here, Dorval Airport, Trudeau Airport in Montreal, we export that expertise. We develop public-private partnerships and the concept of finance, design, build, and operate. We export that model to those countries. I will say, and Alex is again a witness to this, at the World Economic Forum, at the World Bank, at the United Nations, I've been preaching the idea of a protection, some kind of umbrella, so that when a company like ours goes into a country where there might be political risk on the long term, there might be a new government elected who wants to change the rules or cancel a contract, that we would have the protection of some supranational or agency, say the United Nations or the World Bank, that would protect the investment that was made by the foreign entity. And if we could get that, that would create an opportunity and an explosion in the development of infrastructure worldwide, especially in developing economies. So I think that's really important. The other thing that's really important, if we're going to talk about international, is, and there are many people here today, I'm sure, that are involved in certain aspects of the development of expertise in public-private partnerships. Again, I know the World Bank, the United Nations, Global Infrastructure Hub, I don't know how many multilateral agencies, each have their own groups, they're developing their own best practices for public-private partnerships. There's no reason why all those agencies, those organizations can't be around one big table and create one model as a best practice for public-private partnerships. Of course, always adjusted and tailored to local needs on a bespoke basis. I understand that. No, that they will not fit every need, but at least have as a guideline, as a cornerstone for development of public-private partnerships internationally would make a huge difference.
Any questions for John?
Oh, yes.
Ah,
Good question.
there's a gentleman over there. Jeff? I'll just... You got it?
John, great talk. I'm really curious as to why it's so hard to attract the talent you need, given what we hear about people unable to find jobs and the unemployment rates, which are very low. But I mean, it's counterintuitive to hear that you can't attract that kind of talent when there appears to be a lot of that kind of talent unemployed. Can you give us your perspective on that? What's different?
So the nature of our industry and the nature of the projects that we're involved with, if we're talking about managerial talent, if you're talking about labor, I addressed that before, and I think if we just raise the perception of a construction worker as being a valued member of our society, and get that to be somebody that people are proud of, I think that would make a huge difference on the labor side. On the managerial level, we're now involved in projects that are much larger, much more complex than they've ever been. To build a complete transit system of 60 some odd kilometers and 25 or 30 stations at one time has never been done. Certainly not that I know of anywhere around the world. So these are things that require a very specific expertise. I just had a conversation earlier here at lunch. There may be 20 good project managers in the world that can build a $5 billion project. So when you talk about a shortage of talent, these are people that have developed an expertise on very few contracts somewhere in the world over the last 10 or 20 years that are now capable of doing this kind of thing. It requires a lot of training, a lot of education, and what we're trying to do is bring our people together with these people to learn from them, so the next time it comes around, we may not need them, or instead of being 20 available, there might be 200 available.
I remember, Adam, we'll go to you if you can get a microphone. But, John, I remember I was talking to a Secretary of Transportation, and I just asked him once, how much would you pay for a good project manager on this new project that you've just bid out and it's been won? And he looked at me and he said, there's no amount of money I wouldn't pay that person. I mean, these guys are so rare, it's unbelievable.
Unfortunately, we're exposed to that ourselves.
Professional athlete salaries.
John, you developed some incredible expertise, prodigious expertise in the P3 sector in North America. Recognizing the staggering needs for infrastructure upgrades, refurbishment in the United States, are you trying to convey some of this expertise? And if yes, are you positioning for certain states? Because, each state has its own dynamic within the United States. So what's your position there?
So if you're talking about expertise as advisors or consultants, no. If you're talking about participating in the markets, we have looked at various opportunities in the U.S. Right now, there is so much going on in Canada, and we're having so much difficulty just finding the right people to execute these so complex projects that we're facing. We wouldn't have the capacity to go into the U.S. right now to transfer that expertise or to partner with the Americans to do that. It is just not enough capacity already in industry in Canada for us to be able to do that. We are now at the highest level of activity we've ever been. We're continuing to grow, train people, hire people that have competence, but we don't have enough people today to meet the demands that we know is coming at us just in Canada. So for now, no thank you for the U.S.
So any other questions? Maybe time for one more question?
Norm, I hope you didn't take that personally. I didn't mean we don't want to work in the U.S. It's just we have no capacity for
No,
that.
but you've been telling me that for years, right? So how could I take it personally? I took it personally the first time. Gladys, do you... lady? Yeah, but you already asked a whole bunch, so yeah. No, you get the last question.
They're good questions.
Yeah. No, Gladys going to go, and then you go.
So Gladys Singh with Precisionhawk. I think it's an interesting point you make
First
about
of all, what does Precisionhawk do, please, Gladys?
So Precisionhawk, we're a drone platform company, so we really look at what are the area where it comes to aerial intelligence, which includes drone, data capture, how that can help provide the data insights necessary that different infrastructure operators and owners are looking to generate throughout the infrastructure life cycle. So all the way from master planning, through to operating and maintaining these assets to divest or recap. So, what I'm really focused on is, how at each one of those stage gates, drone capture data can help provide and drive those insights, and then pushing it through the workflow to actually, do it within the client platforms and the way that they're looking at the data today. So whether it's integration with Autodesk tools and software, BIM, we've talked about, so kind of bridging that gap, so to speak. But the question I have is, when you look at technology, it's one thing to incite and welcome technology and industry, to enter the equation. It's another thing when you actually evaluate and incentivize technology to be brought into, how projects are scored and evaluated, and for folks who are teaming, to deliver and execute those projects to actually think about technology. So do you have any recommendations, from your point of view of how to kind of change the procurement and the execution so that it's, actually evaluated on that premise?
Absolutely, because we've been going through technological transformation at our company now for years. The advice I would give is that if you do not get the rank and file people on the ground at the work phase to be the ones that want it and be the ones that adopt it with enthusiasm, it's going to fail. And so it can never be top down. If it's top down, it doesn't work. And the only way is to motivate, explain the positive attributes, the facts that we'll be safer, we'll be more efficient, we'll be more intelligent, we'll be more informed, we'll be more warned in advance of issues as they come up. If we can get them to believe that it's good for each one of them in their day-to-day work, and they support the idea of the introduction of all these technologies that we've talked about earlier, then over time, because it will take time, and the evolution of the average age being lower at some point, when the younger people come over, are much more open to these ideas, will eventually get us moving in the right direction technologically. But it has to be from the ground up, and it's very difficult, we have found. And knowing what others in our industry have done, they've found the same thing. Sometimes the failures have been multiple. They've had to try 2 and 3 times before they got it going the right time. But it's an absolute necessity. So it's a matter of education, and you use the word incentivize. We've tried to use incentive schemes. That's not really going to, how it's going to work. It's by them feeling that their day-to-day work is optimized and brings them success as well as the company success, that's the way it'll work.
Very good. And Robert, I guess you get the first and the last question.
It might not be an easy question at first.
Might as well use the microphone because not everybody can hear you.
First, congratulations on this is a great lesson that you're. So I teach at 2 universities in Montreal, and it's great to see how we've grown in terms of the engineering side. One major question, and I was speaking to Christian about that earlier on. We have the feeling that the P3 may be growing in absolute terms, but there's a new trend appearing now, especially with the financiers, pension funds, endowments, insurance companies, life insurance companies, whatever, who wish to own directly projects and not in a P3 format at all. Do you see that growing, and do you see that as a major new trend, or is that just a marginal trend and P3 will go on growing faster and faster? Where do you see that? Because we'd like to know whether finance is having a new role within the infrastructure market.
Very, very good question and very topical. So originally, P3s were developed by construction companies as a way of controlling the entire project as opposed to just supplying some of the services, and at the same time filling the need of governments. I mentioned toll roads, airports, water, things like that. There always were two components to that. One was the financing component, and the other one was the construction component. Then there was the operation and so on. And when I say construction, it's usually design build, so it includes design, includes the engineering, sometimes the architecture as well. As things have evolved, more and more of the contractors who were doing the financing needed maybe some additional funding and went to banks, insurance companies, pension funds, specialized funds in infrastructure to participate on the equity side. But all those players, those financial players, didn't like the idea of the risk of construction. So they said, well, we will put in our money maybe at the end of the project when it's all built and it's running and there's a proven revenue stream, but they didn't have the risk appetite to see what if things go wrong, what if there's an overrun, what if somebody goes bankrupt during construction and so on. So the idea was that they would buy proven, steady state earning projects. Now that we've seen a lot of these things successful, some of these, including Caisse de Dépôt in the case of the REM, are saying, let's take a little more risk. Let's be the financier from the beginning, as opposed to waiting for it to be built. Let's get the right construction teams. That's why we're selected as part of that, to be sure that things will get delivered on time and on budget and so on. But hey, instead of letting the other guys get the return on that equity investment, we'll get that return, and we're now ready to step forward. Now, they're an exception. There are not too many other pension funds in Canada or in anywhere else in the world that I know about that are willing to take what I call construction risk. But they may be more, because when they're successful on this one, it'll guide others. I can tell you banks will not take construction risk. In terms of equity, they'll take it as lenders. And the insurance companies are sort of halfway in between. So I think it's an evolution. It's not, there's no more P3. It's a different owner of the equity part of a P3. What Caisse de Dépôt is doing is a P3. It's just they happen to be the owner of the equity. And there is, Monsieur le Premier Ministre is a shareholder in the REM project, and so is Monsieur le Premier Ministre in Ottawa, right? So there's a pension fund and there's two governments in this case who are taking some equity risk. So it's not something replacing P3. It's some of the investors in P3s, or construction companies, and investment vehicles are being added to by pension funds.
So before we close and before we thank John, I just want to highlight one fascinating thing about John and about this industry that he hasn't even come close to mentioning, which is the incredible creativity of this industry and all that you all really provide for the world. So one of John's sons is a musician, and he wrote the score for Frozen. So all of the music, I mean, it's fantastic. And I really see that as a big part of this industry, John, that there's a lot of creativity. You know, there's a lot of exactitude, a lot of technical capability, but the real sort of winners and the real fantastic thing about your industry is the creativity of all of you all and what you offer the world because of that.
That's right. Yes, Norm, you're right.
Wow, that's fantastic. Nobody ever says I'm right. Anyway, thank you so much, John. It's really great to have you. Thank you so much.
Merci beaucoup.